"Papa," she said, "just look at most of the ranchers we know. All of them wear heavy wool cowboy hats in the summer. And most of them have lost their hair." Papa laughed at Mama. He laughed so hard the tears ran down his face and his stomach hurt. But his laughing did not stop Mama. She told him about Jim Berry, who lost his hair about 2 years ago. Papa, a little angry, answered, "It was not the cowboy hat that made Jim Berry lose his hair. It was his wife, always talking about hats and not giving him any peace and quiet." Mama said nothing. She stopped talking about hats. I wondered what was going to happen. Then, one day, Mama got up earlier than usual. She marched to the kitchen and made breakfast. She had a very serious look on her face. She did not say a word. She made more noise than usual. She put the dishes down so hard I thought they would break. Suddenly she got in the car and drove toward the city. She did not tell us why she was going. Later, she came home with a straw hat. She still looked very serious. There had not been much rain that year. It was a bad year for ranchers. We had only a little money. But it was the year for Papa to buy a new cowboy hat. Mama knew this. She also thought that if she spent the money for a straw hat, Papa would not spend any money to buy a cowboy hat. Mama was right. When Papa saw the straw hat, his face got red. He said nothing. He pulled the straw hat down over his head until it hid his eyes. He looked very funny. I wanted to laugh, but I did not. I was afraid to, because Papa was so angry. I remember how quiet he was as he marched out of the house. I followed him that day. He was going to train the wild horses again. I loved to watch him work. He had gotten the horses earlier in the year, but they were still half wild, half trained. Papa slowly walked toward the field where the horses were eating grass. He was a good rancher because he was gentle with horses, never cruel to them. He had given names to all the horses. He always called to them when he first saw them in the morning. He talked softly to them so they would not be afraid. Sometimes the horses walked up to him when he called their names. They knew his cowboy hat, which he wore every day. They did not feel safe near any other person. I followed Papa as he walked toward the field calling their names. At first, the horses continued to eat, but as Papa got closer, the horses looked up at him. Suddenly they jumped high into the air, raising their front feet. Then they began to run around wildly. They screamed the way frightened horses do. One horse kicked a hay wagon over. All of them ran around and around in the field, and then raced toward the barn where they slept. I never heard such a noise. Papa began to shout, "Whoa, boys! Steady, boys, steady!" But there was nothing he could do. He marched toward the house. Inside the barn, the frightened horses screamed and kicked hard against the walls of the barn. Mama came running out of the house. She stood near the door, waiting for Papa. She held her hands against her heart. "What is it, Papa? What is it?" Papa did not answer. She held the door open, and he marched into the house. Mama followed him. I went in after them to see what was going to happen. Papa walked straight to the stove in the kitchen. He opened the top of the stove, pulled the straw hat off his head, and pushed it deep down into the fire. At last, he turned to Mama and looked at her in a way that even frightened me. I never heard Papa so angry. He shouted and shouted all sorts of new words. At last, his anger was gone. Then he said in a soft but firm voice, "Now listen to me, Mama. Understand this. I will never wear a straw hat or any other kind of hat my horses do not like." Then he put on his Sunday cowboy hat and walked out of the house. It was almost midnight when the noise died away and the animals became quiet. The next day, Papa fixed all the broken wood in the walls of the barn. I never heard Mama talk any more about hats. Perhaps that is why, when Papa died many years later, there was a round spot on the top of his head where there was no hair.